The scent of smoke and rain hung in the air as Zara Keller stood on her front porch, watching the bank representatives drive away with the deed to her family's homestead clutched tightly in their greedy hands. For 3 generations, the Keller farm had stood proud against the California foothills, but now in the summer of 1885, it would be just another property auctioned to the highest bidder. Zara's hands trembled as she clutched the eviction notice. 1 week. She had 1 week to pack up 28 years of memories and find somewhere else to go. She glanced back at the weathered 2-story farmhouse her grandfather had built with his own hands. The pain in her chest felt physical, as though someone had reached inside and was slowly crushing her heart. "This ain't right," she whispered to the empty yard, her voice carrying across the fields where the wheat she'd planted would soon belong to someone else. The drought had been brutal this year, but she would have recovered if the bank had just given her more time. Sierra City, California had once been a booming mining town. Now, in 1885, it was a shadow of its former self, with the gold rush long over and most of the inhabitants either having moved on or settled into ranching and farming. Zara's family had been among those who stayed, transforming what had been a miner's claim into fertile farmland. Her parents had died 3 years prior in a wagon accident, leaving Zara to manage the homestead alone. She had done well enough until last year when the drought came. Then the locusts. And finally, her prized mare, the one she had been counting on to birth a foal she could sell, had died during delivery. The cascade of misfortunes had left her unable to make the mortgage payments to the Sierra City Bank and Trust. Inside the house, Zara walked slowly through the rooms, trailing her fingers along the familiar walls. Her throat tightened as she looked at the hand-stitched quilt her mother had made, still draped across the back of a rocking chair. How could she pack up a lifetime in just 7 days? As evening fell, Zara lit the oil lamp in the kitchen and sat down at the worn oak table to write letters to distant relatives. Perhaps someone would take her in until she could find work and a place of her own. Meanwhile, across town at the Silver Dollar Saloon, Colton Zachary leaned against the polished bar, nursing a whiskey and listening to the gossip flowing as freely as the alcohol. At 32, Colton had lived enough lives for 3 men. He'd been a cattle driver, a bounty hunter, and for the last 5 years, a successful rancher with a sprawling property on the outskirts of Sierra City. "Heard old man Phillips over at the bank is foreclosing on the Keller place," said Hank, the bartender, as he wiped down the counter. "Shame, really. That Keller girl's been working that land all by herself since her folks passed." Colton's interest piqued. He'd seen Zara Keller in town occasionally but had never spoken to her. Everyone knew she kept to herself, working from sunrise to sunset to maintain the homestead her grandfather had established. "When's the auction?" Colton asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Next Monday. Phillips didn't waste any time putting it up. Says there's already interest from some company back east looking to buy up land for the railroad." Colton frowned. The railroad men had been circling Sierra City like vultures for the past year, buying up properties and forcing out families who'd lived on the land for generations. The thought of another homestead falling into their hands didn't sit right with him. "How much is she behind?" Hank leaned in, lowering his voice. "Heard it's about $800, not a small sum, but not impossible neither." Colton nodded, considering. $800 was a significant amount, but he had been fortunate in recent years. His cattle ranch was thriving, and he'd made some wise investments in a silver mine that had paid off handsomely. "She got any family to help her out?" he asked. "None that I know of," Hank replied. "Parents died a few years back. No siblings. She's alone in this world, poor thing." Colton drained his glass and stood up, placing a coin on the bar. "Thanks for the information, Hank." Outside, the night air was cool against his face as he mounted his horse and rode toward home. But his thoughts weren't on his own ranch. They were on a woman he barely knew and the land she was about to lose. The next morning, Zara rose before dawn as she always did. There was still work to be done. even if the farm wouldn't be hers much longer. The chickens needed feeding, the cow needed milking, and the vegetative garden required watering. She might be leaving, but she would care for the animals and plants until the very end. As the sun crested the eastern hills, casting golden light across the fields, Zara paused in her chores. A rider was approaching down the long dirt road that led to the farmhouse. Visitors were rare, especially this early. She shielded her eyes against the sunlight, watching as the figure grew closer. It was a man on a magnificent black stallion, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning sky. When he was near enough for her to make out his features, she recognized Colton Zachary, the rancher whose property bordered the northern edge of town. "Morning, Miss Keller," he called as he drew his horse to a stop at the edge of her yard. Zara wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance and the strands of auburn hair that had escaped her practical braid. "Mr. Zachary," she replied with a nod, trying to maintain her dignity despite the circumstances. "What brings you out this way?" Colton dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime spent on horseback. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair was neatly trimmed beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "I heard about what happened with the bank," he said, direct and without pretense. "I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Zara's pride stiffened her spine. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Zachary, but I don't need charity." "Not offering charity, Miss Keller. Just neighborly concern." His gaze took in the well-maintained farm, the fields beyond. "This is good land. Shame to see it go to the railroad." Zara's eyes widened. "The railroad? Is that who's buying it?" Colton nodded. "That's the word in town. They've been buying up properties all through the foothills. Once they get hold of it, they'll tear down everything your family built." The thought made Zara's stomach clench. She had resigned herself to losing the farm, but somehow the idea of the house being demolished, the orchard her father had planted being ripped out for train tracks, was even more painful. "There's nothing I can do," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bank won't extend my loan, and I don't have the money to pay what I owe." Colton studied her for a long moment, noting the pride in her stance despite the sorrow in her eyes. "How much time do you have?" "They gave me a week to vacate. The auction is on Monday." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Would you allow me to look around the property? I've always admired this land from a distance." Zara hesitated, then shrugged. "I suppose there's no harm in it. I need to finish my chores, but feel free to walk about." "I'd be happy to help with those chores if you'll let me," Colton offered, pride warred with practicality in Zara's mind. Finally, practicality won. "The north field needs watering. The irrigation ditch might need clearing first." Colton smiled, touching the brim of his hat. "I know a thing or two about irrigation. Point me in the right direction and I'll get to work." For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Zara was surprised by Colton's willingness to get his hands dirty. For a successful rancher, he seemed remarkably comfortable with the hard labor of a small farm. By midday, they had accomplished twice what Zara could have done alone. "You're welcome to stay for lunch," she offered as they finished repairing a section of fence. "It's simple fare, just bread and stew, but there's plenty." "I'd be honored," Colton replied, washing his hands at the pump outside the kitchen door. Inside, Zara moved about the kitchen with practiced efficiency, ladling stew into bowls and cutting thick slices from a loaf of fresh bread. Colton sat at the table, taking in the homey atmosphere of the farmhouse. "You've kept this place up well," he observed. "Can't be easy managing it all on your own." Zara placed a bowl in front of him and sat down across the table. "It's not, but it's worth it. Every inch of this land has my family's sweat and blood in it." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "Or at least it did." "Tell me about your family," Colton said, genuinely interested. As they ate, Zara shared stories of her grandfather who had come west during the gold rush, how he had claimed this land and transformed it from wilderness into a working farm. She spoke of her parents, her father's dedication to improving the soil year after year, her mother's beautiful garden that still flourished at the side of the house. Colton listened attentively, asking questions that revealed his own knowledge of farming and ranching. He told her about his own journey, how he'd worked as a cowhand for years, saving every penny until he could buy his first small herd, which had grown into the successful ranch he now owned. It wasn't easy, he admitted. There were times I wasn't sure I'd make it. But I was lucky I had a few people who believed in me, who gave me a chance when I needed it. Something in his tone made Zara look at him more closely. Is that why you're here, Mr. Zachary, to give me a chance? Colton, please, he said with a small smile. And yes, I suppose that's part of it. I've been where you are not exactly, but close enough to know how it feels when everything you've worked for is slipping away. I appreciate the sentiment, Zara said, rising to clear the dishes. But unless you can conjure $800 by Monday, there's not much chance to be given. 800, Colton repeated, as if committing the number to memory. That's the amount you need to clear the debt, plus interest, Zara confirmed bitterly. Mr. Phillips at the bank was quite specific about that. Colton rose as well, helping her gather the dishes. Howard Phillips has always been more interested in profits than people. His father wasn't like that. Old Thomas Phillips would have worked with you, given you more time. Well, Thomas isn't running the bank anymore, Zara said with a sigh, and I've run out of options. As Colton prepared to leave that afternoon, he paused at the edge of the porch. Would you permit me to come back tomorrow? There are a few more repairs I noticed that I could help with. Zara was surprised by the offer. You don't need to do that. You've already been more than kind. It's no trouble, he assured her. My foreman has things well in hand at my ranch. I'd like to help if I can, even if it's just making these last days easier for you. Something about his sincerity touched Zara, breaking through the wall of independence she had built around herself since her parents' deaths. All right, I would welcome the help and… She hesitated. The company? Colton tipped his hat, a warm smile lighting his blue eyes. Until tomorrow then, Miss Keller. As he rode away, Zara watched his retreating figure, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was still the crushing reality of losing her home, but something about Colton Zachary's visit had kindled a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. True to his word, Colton returned the next morning and the morning after that. Each day they worked together, repairing fences, tending to the animals, and harvesting what was ready in the garden. They fell into an easy rhythm, their conversation flowing naturally as they worked. Zara found herself looking forward to his arrivals, watching the road for the first glimpse of his tall figure on horseback. It wasn't just the physical help he provided, though that was substantial, but the way his presence made the burden of her impending loss feel slightly less overwhelming. On the third day, as they sat on the porch sharing a pitcher of lemonade, Zara found herself opening up about her fears. I've been writing to distant cousins in Oregon, hoping someone might take me in until I can find work, she admitted. But I haven't received any replies yet. Colton frowned. You're planning to leave Sierra City? Zara gave him a puzzled look. What choice do I have? There's not much work for a woman here unless I want to take in laundry or work at the hotel. You could stay, Colton suggested. You have skills that are valuable. Any ranch or farm would be lucky to have someone with your knowledge and work ethic. Perhaps, Zara conceded, but it would be difficult to stay and watch someone else living on my family's land, changing everything we built. Colton was quiet for a moment, staring out at the golden fields stretching toward the distant mountains. What if? He began, then seemed to think better of it and shook his head. What? Zara prompted, curious. Nothing, he said with a slight smile. Just a thought that needs more consideration. The day before the auction, Zara woke with a sense of dread so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her chest. This was her last full day on the farm. Tomorrow, strangers would gather in town to bid on her family's legacy as if it were just another commodity to be bought and sold. She had packed most of her belongings, the things she could take with her, anyway. The larger furniture would have to stay, along with the farm equipment and most of the kitchen items. She had arranged to sell the livestock to a neighboring farmer, except for her riding horse, which she would keep. When Colton arrived that morning, his expression was serious, almost solemn. "I won't be able to come tomorrow," he said as he dismounted. "I have business in Sacramento that can't be postponed." Disappointment washed over Zara, sharper than she expected. She had come to rely on Colton's steady presence these past few days. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile. "You've already been far too generous with your time. I can't thank you enough for all your help." "No thanks necessary," he replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than usual. "I've enjoyed our time together, Zara." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. They spent the day working side by side as they had all week, but there was a new tension between them, an awareness that this was the end of something that had barely begun. As evening approached, Colton helped Zara load the last of her packed belongings onto the small wagon she would take with her the following day. "Where will you go tomorrow?" he asked as they stood in the yard, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "The widow Jensen has offered me a room in town until I decide what to do next," Zara replied. "She's been kind." Colton nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Jensen is a good woman. You'll be comfortable there." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and feelings neither was ready to acknowledge. Finally, Colton cleared his throat. "I should be heading back. I need to leave early for Sacramento." "Of course," Zara said, suddenly feeling the need to memorize every detail of his face. "Safe travels, Colton." He stepped closer, surprising her by taking her hand in his. "This isn't goodbye, Zara. I'll find you when I return." Before she could respond, he released her hand, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving Zara standing in the yard with her heart beating strangely fast and her hand still warm from his touch. The morning of the auction dawned clear and bright, as if nature were mocking Zara's sorrow with perfect weather. She moved through the house one last time, saying silent goodbyes to the rooms where she had grown up, where her family had lived and loved and created a home. In town, the auction was set for noon at the courthouse steps. Zara couldn't bear to watch strangers bid on her home, so she stayed at the farm until the last possible moment, only leaving when the bank's representative arrived to escort her to town. The streets of Sierra City were busier than usual, with people gathering for the auction. Zara kept her head high as she guided her wagon toward the widow Jensen's boarding house, ignoring the sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that followed her progress. At the courthouse, a crowd had already gathered. Businessmen from Sacramento, representatives from the railroad, and local farmers and ranchers stood in groups, discussing the property. Howard Phillips, the bank manager, stood on the steps with a self-satisfied smile that made Zara's blood boil. She turned away, unable to watch. As she reached Mrs. Jensen's house, the widow herself came hurrying out. "Zara, there you are. You need to get to the courthouse right away." "I can't, Mrs. Jensen. I can't watch them sell my home." The older woman grabbed her arm, her eyes bright with excitement. "You don't understand. Something's happening. The auction, it's not going as expected. You need to see for yourself." Confused but intrigued, Zara allowed Mrs. Jensen to lead her back toward the courthouse. The crowd had grown, and there was a buzz of conversation that stopped abruptly when people noticed Zara's arrival. They parted to let her through, many faces now showing smiles rather than pity. On the courthouse steps, Howard Phillips no longer looked self-satisfied. Instead, his face was flushed with anger as he argued with the auctioneer. And standing to one side, watching the proceedings with a calm expression, was a man Zara had never seen before, a well-dressed gentleman with silver at his temples who seemed to be the focus of much attention. "What's happening?" Zara asked a woman standing nearby. "The auction's been canceled," the woman replied with evident delight. "That man there, he's a lawyer from Sacramento." showed up just as they were about to start and presented papers proving the mortgage had been paid in full. Zara's heart nearly stopped. Paid? How? By whom? No one knows for sure, the woman said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. But rumor has it that Colton Zachary was seen at the bank in Sacramento yesterday, making quite a substantial withdrawal. Disbelief and hope warred within Zara as she pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Howard Phillips saw her and his scowl deepened. "Miss Keller," he said, his voice dripping with forced politeness, "perhaps you can explain this situation. It seems someone has taken it upon themselves to settle your debt without informing you." The lawyer stepped forward, introducing himself as Jonathan Mercer. "Miss Keller, I represent the individual who has purchased your mortgage from the Sierra City Bank and Trust. My client has paid the debt in full and instructed me to inform you that the property remains yours." Zara felt lightheaded, unable to process what she was hearing. "I don't understand. Who would do such a thing?" Mr. Mercer smiled. "My client wishes to remain anonymous for now. However, I have been instructed to give you this." He held out an envelope. With trembling fingers, Zara took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the deed to her farm, with her name clearly written as the owner, free and clear of all debts and liens. Tears filled her eyes as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Her home was saved. But who had done this? Who had paid such a substantial sum to help a woman they barely knew? As the crowd dispersed, some disappointed, others simply curious about the unexpected turn of events, Zara clutched the deed to her chest and made her way back to Mrs. Jensen's house to collect her things. Her home was still hers. She could go back. The ride back to the farm was surreal. Every familiar landmark along the road seemed more beautiful than before, now that she knew she wouldn't have to leave them behind. As the house came into view, Zara felt a lump form in her throat. Home. Still hers. But as she drew closer, she realized there was someone waiting on the porch. A tall figure stood leaning against the post, and even from a distance, she recognized Colton Zachary's broad-shouldered silhouette. She urged her horse faster, questions tumbling through her mind. As she pulled up to the house, Colton straightened, a cautious smile on his face. "Welcome home, Zara," he said simply. She dismounted, still clutching the deed in one hand. "It was you," she said, not a question but a realization. "You paid off the mortgage." Colton nodded, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I did." "Why?" She whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his generosity. He took a step toward her. "Because this land is part of who you are, because you deserve the chance to keep what your family built." He paused, a hint of vulnerability crossing his features. "And because in the short time I've known you, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible." Zara's heart raced at his words. "Colton, I can't accept such an enormous gift. $800, it's too much." "It's not a gift," he said firmly. "It's an investment in something I believe in, you and this farm." He gestured to the fields beyond the house. "This land has potential, Zara, and so do you." "I'll pay you back," she insisted. "Every penny. It might take years," but Colton held up a hand to stop her. "I have a different proposition if you're willing to hear it." Curious, Zara nodded. "I own more land than I can properly manage on my own," he explained. "My cattle ranch is successful, but I've always wanted to diversify, grow crops, plant orchards. Your knowledge of farming combined with my resources could create something remarkable. We could work together as partners." Zara considered his words. "Partners?" she asked cautiously. "To start with," Colton said, a warmth in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Though I'd hope in time we might consider a more permanent arrangement." Understanding dawned on Zara and a blush rose to her cheeks. "Mr. Zachary, are you proposing a business partnership or something else entirely?" A smile spread across his face, genuine and warm. "I'm proposing we give ourselves time to see where this leads. I know we've only known each other a short while, but I've never met anyone like you, Zara Keller. You're strong, determined, and more capable than anyone I've ever known. I'd like the chance to know you better, to see if what I'm feeling might be mutual." Zara looked down at the deed in her hand, then back at Colton. A week ago, she had been facing the loss of everything she loved. Now, not only was her home secure, but a new possibility was opening before her, one that included this remarkable man who had come into her life so unexpectedly. "I think," she said slowly, a smile beginning to form, "that might be an arrangement I could consider." The relief on Colton's face was palpable. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I don't want to rush you, Zara. We have time now. Your home is secure and I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, feeling the gentle strength in his hands holding hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for saving my home, but for giving me a future to look forward to." Colton's smile deepened, and for a moment Zara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hands gently and released them. "How about we start by getting your belongings back into the house? And then perhaps you'll join me for dinner in town tonight to celebrate." "I'd like that," Zara replied, feeling a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. As they worked together to unload her packed belongings, bringing them back into the house that was now truly hers again, Zara felt something taking root within her, something that felt surprisingly like love. Over the following weeks, Zara and Colton developed a routine. He would visit the farm several times a week, and they would work together on improvements, repairing the barn roof, reinforcing the irrigation system, planning for fall planting. In the evenings, they would sometimes ride into town for dinner, or Zara would cook at the farmhouse, and they would sit on the porch talking late into the night. Each visit deepened their connection. Zara learned about Colton's childhood in Missouri, how he had left home at 16 to make his own way in the world. He shared stories of his years as a cowhand, the hardships and adventures that had shaped him into the man he was now. In turn, Zara opened up about her own life, the joys and struggles of growing up on the farm, the devastating loss of her parents, and her determination to keep their legacy alive. As autumn approached, bringing cooler days and the harvest season, their relationship had blossomed into something neither had anticipated. What had begun as respect and gratitude had transformed into a deep affection, and then, undeniably, love. One crisp October evening, they rode out to the western edge of Zara's property, where a small hill offered a panoramic view of both their lands. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. "I've been thinking," Colton said as they sat side by side on a fallen log watching the sunset. "The partnership we discussed, I think it's time we formalized it." Zara glanced at him, noting the serious set of his jaw. "What did you have in mind?" He turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Zara, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Working alongside you, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your heart, I've fallen in love with you." Her breath caught at the directness of his words, though they only confirmed what she had already come to know in her heart. "I love you too," she said softly, the words feeling right and true. The smile that broke across Colton's face was radiant. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Then perhaps you'll consider a different kind of partnership," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Zara Keller, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Zara's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, this good, honorable man who had saved her home and, in the process, captured her heart. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Colton, I will marry you." With gentle hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for their first kiss, a tender, sweet moment that held the promise of all the years to come. The wedding took place in early December, with the first dusting of snow on the ground. The small church in Sierra City was filled with well-wishers, townspeople who had watched their romance unfold and were delighted by the happy ending to what had nearly been a tragedy. Widow Jensen had helped Zara make her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs. As she walked down the aisle toward Colton, who stood tall and proud in a new black suit, Zara felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish, to support and respect, to build a life together that honored both their dreams. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Colton kissed his bride, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at Colton's ranch house, which was now their shared home. They had decided to maintain both properties, the cattle ranch and the farm, joining them into one larger, more diverse operation. Already, they had plans for expanding the orchards on Zara's land and introducing new breeds of cattle to Colton's herds. As evening fell and the last guests departed, Colton led Zara onto the porch of their home. From there, they could see the lights of her farmhouse in the distance, still a part of their life together. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "6 months ago, I thought I was going to lose everything. Now I have more than I ever dreamed of." Colton smiled down at her, his eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them. "We've only just begun, Mrs. Zachary. The best is yet to come." And as they stood together looking out at the land that was now their shared legacy, both knew that his words were true. What had started with an act of generosity, a cowboy buying back a woman's seized homestead, had blossomed into a love story that would span decades. Spring brought new beginnings to the Zachary homestead. The merged properties were thriving under their combined expertise. Zara's knowledge of crop rotation and soil management complemented Colton's understanding of livestock and ranch operations. Together, they created something greater than either could have achieved alone. Word of their success spread throughout Sierra City and beyond. Other farmers and ranchers came seeking advice, and Colton and Zara were always generous with their knowledge. They became respected figures in the community, known not just for their prosperous land, but for their willingness to help others. Their personal happiness grew alongside their professional success. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zara turned to Colton with a smile that held a secret. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed Colton's face was something Zara would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." "Due in November," Zara confirmed, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. In the months that followed, they prepared for the new addition to their family. Colton converted a room in the ranch house into a nursery, carefully crafting a cradle from oak taken from trees on Zara's original homestead, a symbolic joining of their two legacies for the next generation. Zara continued to work alongside her husband throughout her pregnancy, though Colton insisted she take on lighter duties as her time grew nearer. Their partnership, in business and in life, deepened with each passing day. On a cold November night with snow falling gently outside the windows, Zara gave birth to a son. They named him Thomas, after her grandfather who had first settled the homestead. "He has your eyes," Colton said as he held his son for the first time, marveling at the tiny features that somehow combined the best of both of them. "And your chin," Zara replied with a tired smile. "He's perfect." As Thomas grew, so did their family's prosperity. The following year brought a bumper crop of wheat on Zara's land and record prices for Colton's cattle. They reinvested much of their profits back into the land, always looking toward the future. When Thomas was 3, Zara gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor, after Colton's mother. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning to ride almost before they could walk, developing a love and respect for the land that matched their parents. One summer evening, when Thomas was 7 and Eleanor 4, the family took a ride to the original Keller homestead. Though they lived primarily at the larger ranch house, they maintained the farmhouse and surrounding buildings. using them for storage and occasional overnight stays when work kept them on that side of the property. As they approached the familiar white clapboard house, Thomas asked, "Papa, is it true that you saved Mama's farm from the bank?" Colton glanced at Zara with a smile. "Who told you that story, Mrs. Jensen?" the boy replied. "She said Mama was going to lose her home, but you bought it back and gave her the deed." "Is that true?" Zara answered before Colton could. "Yes, it's true. Your father did something very brave and generous. He saved this land for our family." "Why did you do it, Papa?" Eleanor asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Colton lifted his daughter from her pony and set her on his shoulders before answering. "Because sometimes when you see something special, something worth saving, you have to take a chance. I saw how much your mother loved this land, how hard she worked for it. I couldn't let it go to strangers who wouldn't care for it properly. And because he was falling in love with me," Zara added with a teasing smile. Colton laughed. "That too, though I don't think I realized it at the time." They spent the afternoon showing the children around the homestead, telling stories of Zara's childhood and the generations that had worked the land before them. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch steps, the children playing in the yard while Colton and Zara watched, their hands intertwined. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked quietly. "Spending all that money to save my farm?" Colton looked at her with surprise. "Not for a single moment. It was the best investment I ever made." He squeezed her hand. "It brought me you, our children, this life we've built together. How could I possibly regret that?" Zara leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate I am. That day when the bank took my deed, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." "Life has a way of surprising us," Colton said, watching as Thomas helped his little sister climb onto the wooden swing hanging from the old oak tree. "All the best things in my life came from unexpected turns in the road." The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and challenges. There were difficult seasons, droughts that threatened their crops, illness that swept through the cattle herds, a fire that destroyed one of the barns. But through it all, Zara and Colton faced each obstacle together, their partnership only growing stronger with each test. When Thomas was 12, Zara gave birth to their third child, a son they named James. The older children doted on their baby brother, and the family settled into a new rhythm that accommodated the needs of a growing boy, a mischievous young lady, and an infant. As the children grew, so did the Zachary holdings. They purchased adjacent properties when they became available, always with an eye toward creating a legacy that would sustain future generations. Colton's business acumen, combined with Zara's agricultural knowledge, made them formidable partners in the increasingly competitive ranching business. They were not content merely to prosper themselves, however. Both remembered what it was like to struggle, to face the possibility of losing everything. When the drought of 1899 devastated many of the smaller farms in the area, Colton and Zara established a fund to help their neighbors keep their land, offering low-interest loans that could be repaid when times improved. "We're just passing on the kindness that was shown to us," Zara explained when one grateful farmer broke down in tears upon receiving the help that would save his family's homestead. In 1903, as Thomas prepared to leave for college in San Francisco, the first in either of their families to pursue higher education, Zara and Colton celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The celebration, held on the grounds between the ranch house and the original homestead, drew friends and family from throughout the region. Under a canopy of lanterns strung between the trees, with tables laden with food and a small band playing in the background, Colton raised a glass to his wife. "20 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "I made the best decision of my life when I purchased a deed from the Sierra City Bank. I thought I was buying land, but what I really gained was a future, a partner, and the love of my life." Cheers and applause greeted his words, but Colton had eyes only for Zara. Even after 2 decades, the sight of her still made his heart race. The auburn hair now had strands of silver, and the years of working outdoors had left their mark in the fine lines around her eyes, but to him, she was more beautiful than ever. Zara rose to stand beside her husband, taking his hand in hers. 20 years ago, she echoed, a stranger came to my farm and offered help when I needed it most. I didn't know then that he would become my husband, my partner, the father of my children, and the great love of my life. She turned to face Colton directly. You didn't just save my homestead, Colton. You saved me. And every day since, you've shown me what it means to truly love someone. As the celebration continued into the night with dancing and laughter under the stars, Colton and Zara found a quiet moment alone, standing at the exact spot where he had proposed all those years ago. You remember what I said that day? Colton asked, his arms around her waist. Zara smiled up at him. You said the best was yet to come. I was right, he said, pulling her closer. Every year with you has been better than the last, and I have a feeling the next 20 will be even more extraordinary. Is that so, Mr. Zachary? She teased, her eyes alight with the same spark that had first captured his heart. Without a doubt, Mrs. Zachary, he replied before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of their enduring love. As the new century progressed, bringing automobiles, telephones, and other modern conveniences to Sierra City, the Zachary family embraced the changes while maintaining their connection to the land and the traditions that had sustained them. Thomas returned from college with a degree in agriculture and new ideas for improving the family business. Eleanor, who had inherited her father's head for numbers, took over the financial management of their growing enterprise. And young James, with his mother's affinity for the soil, became an expert in crop cultivation. Colton and Zara, now in their 50s but still active in the daily operations of the ranch, watched with pride as their children found their own paths while remaining committed to the land that had been their heritage. In 1915, as war raged in Europe, the family gathered for another milestone: Thomas's wedding to Catherine, a spirited young woman he had met while studying in San Francisco. The ceremony took place on the original Homestead, a tribute to the roots of the Zachary family story. During the reception, as young couples danced on the lawn where Zara had once feared losing everything, she found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she and Colton had built together. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, finding her watching the celebration from the shade of the old oak tree. "I'm thinking about how differently things might have turned out," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "If you hadn't come that day, if you hadn't decided to help a stranger." "I prefer not to think about that alternative," Colton said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is the only life I can imagine you, our children, this land. Everything that matters came from that one moment." Zara turned in his arms to face him, taking in the familiar features that had grown even dearer over the years. "I love you, Colton Zachary, more today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "And I love you, Zara Zachary," he replied, the words as true as the first time he had spoken them on that hillside decades ago. "Always have, always will." As the years continued to pass, the Zachary legacy grew. Grandchildren came, filling both the ranch house and the original homestead with new life and laughter. Colton and Zara, now in their golden years, found joy in passing on their knowledge and values to the next generation. In 1925, on their 40th wedding anniversary, they decided to formally retire, turning over the day-to-day management of the ranch to their children and grandchildren. They chose to move back into the original Keller homestead, which had been lovingly restored and modernized while maintaining its historic character. "It seems fitting," Zara said as they settled into the house where her story had begun, "to come full circle back to where we first met." Their retirement years were filled with simple pleasures: tending a small garden, reading to grandchildren, occasional trips to San Francisco to visit family, and see the changing world beyond Sierra City. Through it all, their love remained the constant that defined their lives. One summer evening in 1930, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, Colton reached for Zara's hand. "You know what today is?" he asked, his voice softer now with age but still carrying the warmth that had first drawn her to him. Zara thought for a moment. "June 18th. Is it significant?" 45 years ago today, I first heard about a young woman who was about to lose her family's homestead to the bank," Colton said, his eyes twinkling with the memory. "I was having a drink at the Silver Dollar when Hank the bartender told me the story. I rode out the next morning to meet this remarkable woman for myself." "Ah," Zara said with a smile, "the day that changed everything." "Indeed it was," Colton agreed. "I've been thinking lately about what made me decide to help you. It wasn't just that I had the means, or that I opposed the railroad's plans for the land." "What was it then?" Zara asked, curious even after all these years. Colton's gaze was tender as he looked at his wife of 4 decades. "It was something I saw in you that first day, a strength, a determination, a light that I hadn't encountered before. Even facing the loss of everything you loved, you had a dignity that moved me. I wanted to know the woman who could stand so tall in the face of such adversity." Zara's eyes filled with tears at his words. "And here we are all these years later." "Here we are," he echoed, lifting her hand to his lips. "The best decision I ever made, buying back that deed." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in the same colors they had watched together countless times, Colton and Zara Zachary sat hand in hand, surrounded by the legacy they had built from that one act of kindness, a family, a thriving business, a community that had benefited from their generosity, and most importantly, a love that had withstood the test of time. The deed that had once been a symbol of loss, and then of hope, now hung framed in the entryway of the homestead, a reminder of how a single decision could change the course of lives. Below it, added years later, was a simple inscription that told their story in a few words. Her homestead was seized by the bank. The cowboy bought it back and gave her the deed, and so began a love that would last a lifetime. In the soft evening light, as they sat together watching another day end and looking forward to the dawn that would follow, Colton and Zara knew that the true value of what they had built together could never be measured in acres or dollars. It was in the moments they had shared, the family they had raised, and the love that had grown from an unexpected act of kindness into the defining story of their lives. And as twilight deepened into night, with stars appearing one by one in the vast California sky, they remained side by side, just as they had been through all the seasons of their remarkable journey together, the cowboy and the woman whose homestead he had saved, whose heart he had won, and whose love had been the greatest treasure of his life.